Thank you, Susan, and good evening, everyone. Someone once told a story about the Archbishop of Canterbury giving a speech, but after having had a glorious introduction, turned to those in the church and said, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray twice. I'm going to pray for the person who made the introduction and told the lies. And I'm going to pray for all of you for listening to them. I thank you for a wonderful introduction from Ahmed. And thank you, Susan, for your words as well. I also know that I once saw a sign that said, life is unpredictable, eat dessert first. And because I'm someone who has a sweet tooth, that was something I remembered. I'm very conscious of the fact that not only are you waiting for dessert, but you're also waiting to dance. And I feel quite guilty about that. So I will stick to my notes and hopefully be quite brief. Ahmed obviously talked about biodiversity is life and the simple and profound message of the 2010 International Year of Biodiversity. It captures the fundamental importance of biodiversity for our very existence, and of course it's a very worthy focus for your conference. The designation of 2010 as the International Year of Biodiversity is really an opportunity that we shouldn't squander. In the late 80s, we faced mounting evidence that environmental web that sustains all of our life was actually unraveling. Species and their habitats were disappearing at an alarming pace. 20 years later, the threat continues unabated. In Canada, we felt the effects of biodiversity loss in many ways. Oft-quoted is, of course, the collapse of the Newfoundland and Labrador fishery, which caused the loss of some 35,000 jobs. Statistics show that approximately $4.5 billion is spent each year in the agricultural sector alone because of invasive exotic species. The potential opportunities lost for medicinal purposes and even the very intrinsic value of biodiversity itself illustrates the consequences of biological diversity loss and underscore the importance of biodiversity in our daily lives. It's a pleasure to share the stage with my friend Ahmed. The Convention on Biological Diversity was a major milestone in that it not only drew world attention to the crisis we were facing, but it also recognized simultaneously that we had more than one objective. One objective was clearly the wise management and conservation of biological diversity, but the other was a development objective. It articulated an ethical imperative of the fair and equal sharing of benefits, a search for mutual reliance and solidarity in the world. Ahmed and the Secretariat have continued tirelessly to breathe life into the implementation of the agreement. I want to give them credit particularly for using this International Year of Biodiversity so effectively in raising the profile of biodiversity issues, and particularly for 3 accomplishments. The first, of course, is happening next week, next Wednesday in New York, when on this occasion of International Year of Biodiversity, for the first time, there will be an event that involves heads of state. It's an excellent opportunity to continue to raise the profile, but it also pays testament, I think, to the hard work not only of the CBD Secretariat, but also non-governmental organizations and member governments. Secondly, I'd like to congratulate them and also UNEP for the release of the 3rd Global Biodiversity Outlook. a hugely important document in understanding the challenges that we're facing now in a world that has changed very much since the convention was originally negotiated. Next month's 10th conference in Nagoya, Japan, will surely reflect on the findings of that report, even as they celebrate yet another step along the journey. And finally, perhaps with the greatest long-term impact, I want to highlight and pay accord to the work to move towards an intergovernmental science policy platform. Built on the very best of the lessons learned from the IPCC, I think this organization holds great hope that policymakers will have access to the best available knowledge should they choose to use it. So, notwithstanding the far-sighted work of scientists to address gaps in our knowledge, the persistence and dedication of non-governmental organizations, and the passionate leadership of certain countries and individuals, it's clear that our work 10, 15 years later is still in its infancy. We know now more than ever that tampering with the Earth's life support system is a very dangerous game. For some reason, we don't seem to understand yet how to avoid collision between growing ecological pressures and significant challenges both to social cohesion and to economic expansion. So I want to spend just a few moments this evening reflecting with you about the business of transformation. You're here because you really want to bring about change, because you understand that unless we change, we and our children face a diminished future. I'd like to suggest that there are at least 3 prerequisites for bringing about effective transformation: evidence, dialogue, and action. And I hope that by the end of my brief remarks, you'll see the opportunities for non-governmental organizations, the organizations that you represent, to be an elemental force in shaping and realizing successful and significant reinvention. And I'm going to, I hope, pose several questions to you as backdrop for the important discussions that you're going to have all day tomorrow. Let me turn first to the matter of evidence and the continuing search for understanding. Every day we know more about the world than we did in the past. Every day we find things out that we didn't even know that we needed to know. Knowledge is continuously building upon itself. Science is always advancing. And behind it all, evidence is being documented and studied. Without evidence, scientific law and truth would become mere theories and speculation. Compelling evidence is also what's needed to mobilize decision makers to develop appropriate policies and practices. All of you in this room know that biodiversity is real, biodiversity loss is real, and the evidence is undeniable. Thank you. To make it easier. But the world around us is not standing still. The widening gap between rich and poor, overcrowded cities, the increasing frequency of extreme weather events, resurgence of infectious diseases, pressures of human migration, cultural, social, and political upheavals are all signs that this is a world in broadly disequilibrium, a world in which we're facing increasing instability. And the impact of that instability and change on biodiversity must be understood. We see the impacts of climate change already: coral bleaching, shifts in habitat, melting of glaciers, and perhaps most dramatically for Canadians, the dramatically changing Arctic landscape. All of those present challenges to biodiversity. And the reality is that we still know very little about our vast north. But changing circumstances now mean that we actually have an opportunity to discover and catalog new species and to learn more about concepts of vulnerability and resilience. In parallel, scientific and technological developments are also bringing new challenges. How do we acknowledge the precautionary principle while we seek the benefits of fast-paced biotechnology discoveries for improving health and stimulating the economy? The amazing feat of sequencing the human genome brought the astonishing knowledge that we have only twice as many genes as we thought we had, twice as many as a fly or a worm. With its capacity to recreate nature and even change what it means to be human, science is now confronting moral dilemmas and profound choices that will require even deeper global dialogue and greater systemic thinking than we've ever achieved. And of course, many of the thorny questions demand more effective integration of the social sciences and the integration of knowledge from a wide spectrum of disciplines. How do we actually reflect traditional knowledge? What do we actually mean by sustainable use? And how do we place an economic value on biodiversity? I'm very interested in the work of Teague, the work that I think seeks to assign economic value to the services that are provided by biodiversity, and I know that that's a key focus of your meeting tomorrow. If we're successful in really starting to think in an integrated way about the opportunities that biodiversity provides to other sectors, then there's a potential for huge changes, I think, in the way that nations value and therefore conserve. Let me turn to the second preoccupation, which is dialogue. With evidence in hand, we can then turn to the fact that the loss of biodiversity, while being a threat to all life on Earth, is a message that everyone needs to hear. It needs to be understood by everybody, and that understanding can only be brought about through effective dialogue. And I'm not just talking dialogue with governments, I'm talking dialogue with our citizens. And so, as I said at the beginning, to this end, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services has real potential. It has potential because it can ensure that decision makers have access to and understand the scientific evidence that actually underpins the decisions that they need to make. Hopefully that will in fact create a better dialogue between scientists and policymakers. Because as it is right now, scientists often don't understand why it is that policymakers don't act on the evidence they have, and policymakers are frustrated that scientists don't seem to appreciate the multiple social, economic, and geopolitical factors that they have to take into account when making policy decisions. That's really the goal of the Council of Canadian Academies. It's a non-profit organization that provides public and decision makers with evidence-based information and analysis on key issues of public policy. We take great pride in our independence and in providing unbiased expert assessments. We bring together the brightest and best minds across Canada and abroad to participate in expert panels, multidisciplinary panels, allowing the Council to synthesize a truly integrated report in the public interest. A report that says, here's what we know about the science, and equally, here's what we don't know.